Every year, I sit across from patients in the recovery room and say the same thing. And every year, the reaction is the same disbelief. Because what most people over 60 expect from a heart attack is a scene. Crushing chest pressure, a left arm that goes cold and numb, a collapse dramatic enough to summon help. That's the version we've all been shown. On television, in movies, in the cultural imagination of what cardiac danger looks like. That version is wrong, and that misconception, quietly held by millions of Americans, is costing lives. After 60, the heart attacks that kill most often are not the loud ones. They are the ones that build in complete silence, over hours, sometimes over weeks, while you sleep, while your body is supposed to be restoring itself. No warning shot, no rehearsal. By the time something feels wrong, for many people, there is no longer time to act. Here is what I tell every patient who wakes up on the other side of one of those events. What happened to you did not come from nowhere. It was set in motion hours before, by something you did in your own bedroom, in your own kitchen, in the last quiet hour of an ordinary evening you expected to forget by morning. I'm Dr. Thompson. I am a cardiac surgeon with over 20 years of operating experience, 20 years of open chests, repaired vessels, and hearts that needed a second chance their owners never anticipated needing. I have also spent those 20 years studying not just what goes wrong inside the body, but what goes wrong the night before. The habits, the patterns, the completely unremarkable decisions that repeat themselves, night after night, in patients who had no idea what they were building toward. Tonight, I'm going to show you 5 of those patterns. 5 habits that are silently working against your heart while you sleep. And more importantly, I'm going to show you exactly what to do instead, a straightforward evening protocol, grounded in clinical evidence, that you can begin implementing tonight, not next month. Tonight, stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you are going to understand your heart's most vulnerable hours better than most physicians ever explain them to you. Let me tell you something that most cardiologists never take the time to explain, and that most patients over 60 have never once been told. Your heart does not clock out when you fall asleep. It doesn't rest. It doesn't pause. What it does is something far more precise. It shifts into a completely different mode of operation. And in a young, healthy cardiovascular system, that shift is one of the most elegant things the human body does. Blood pressure drops naturally, typically 10 to 20% below daytime levels. Heart rate settles into a slower, steadier rhythm. The arterial walls soften and relax. Inflammatory processes quiet down. The entire system enters what I think of as its overnight maintenance cycle, a form of biological housekeeping the body has been running, reliably, since the day you were born. That cycle is not guaranteed after 60. Here is what changes, and why it matters. As we age, the vessels that carry blood throughout the body gradually lose their elasticity. They stiffen. The hormonal signals that once automatically guided blood pressure downward at night, signals your body produced effortlessly at 35, begin to weaken, become inconsistent, sometimes fail entirely. The pressure regulation that used to be automatic now requires more effort and delivers less precision. The margin for error shrinks considerably. During the day, your cardiovascular system operates with redundancy. Multiple compensating mechanisms are active simultaneously. If one pathway falters, another picks up the load. The system is resilient, responsive, forgiving. At night, that redundancy largely disappears. The backup systems go quiet. The body is running, as I often tell my patients, on a skeleton crew. Fewer mechanisms available, less capacity to compensate, and far less tolerance for the kind of additional strain that certain habits quietly introduce. This is the biology behind a number that most people find genuinely startling. The hours between midnight and 6 in the morning represent the highest risk window for heart attack and stroke in adults over 60. Not the afternoon, not the stress of a busy morning. The quiet hours, the hours when the house is still and everyone assumes the body is simply resting. It is not simply resting. It is navigating its most vulnerable shift of the day. And here is the critical piece of this that changes everything. What your heart encounters during those hours is not random. It is not inevitable. It is largely determined by decisions you made before you pulled back the covers. The meal you finished at 9 p.m., the medication you took or skipped that morning, the temperature of the room you walked into, the glass of water you didn't drink, decisions that felt like nothing, Habits so routine they barely registered. That's exactly where we're going next. Starting with the one that surprises my patients more than any other. I want to start with a question, and I want you to answer it honestly. What time did you eat dinner last night? Not what time you intended to eat. Not what time you know you should have eaten. What time did you actually sit down? And what was on that plate? I ask every patient over 60 this question during their follow-up consultation. Not as small talk, as clinical assessment. Because the answer, more often than almost any other single data point, tells me something important about what that person's heart is enduring every night while they sleep. The most common answer I hear? Somewhere between 8 and 10 in the evening. A full plate pasta, rice, red meat, something fried, something heavy, followed by the couch, maybe a little television, and then bed within the hour. I understand exactly how that pattern develops. Demanding days, family obligations, decades of established routine. Life doesn't always accommodate an early dinner. I'm not here to judge the schedule. I'm here to explain what that schedule is doing inside your chest. When you consume a large meal, your digestive system immediately requisitions an enormous volume of blood to manage the process. Your heart responds by pumping harder and faster to meet that demand. Blood pressure climbs, and within 2 to 4 hours of eating, triglycerides, the circulating fats in your bloodstream, spike to levels that measurably increase the risk of clot formation. Now consider what happens when all of that occurs at 9 or 10 at night, right at the edge of sleep. Your body has a biological expectation for the evening hours. It expects a gradual, quiet transition toward rest, blood pressure easing downward, heart rate slowing, arterial walls relaxing into their overnight recovery state. What a late heavy meal delivers instead is a cardiovascular demand signal firing at precisely the wrong moment. Your heart is simultaneously being asked to power a full digestive cycle and begin its nightly wind down. Those two demands don't coexist gracefully. They compete. And in a body over 60, where arterial flexibility is already reduced and pressure regulation is already less precise, that competition creates strain that accumulates night after night without a single symptom to show for it. The clinical data on this is consistent and clear. Eating within 2 to 3 hours of sleep is associated with significantly elevated nighttime blood pressure, increased rates of acid reflux that can both mimic and trigger cardiac events, and a measurably higher risk of cardiovascular complications during the overnight hours. The correction is straightforward. Finish your primary meal by 6 or 7 in the evening. If genuine hunger requires something later, keep it light, lean protein, vegetables. Nothing that demands serious digestive labor from a body that is trying to protect your heart. One habit. One-time adjustment. One of the most underestimated gifts you can give your cardiovascular system. This is the habit I want you to pay the closest attention to, because in 20 years of cardiac surgery, this is where I have seen the most damage occur, damage that was entirely, completely, inexcusably preventable. If you are over 60 and you take medication for high blood pressure, and statistically, more than 6 in 10 people your age do, there is a conversation you almost certainly have never had with your doctor. Not because your doctor doesn't care, but because the medical system moves quickly. Appointments are short, and this particular detail rarely makes it onto the agenda. That detail is timing. Most people assume that as long as they take their blood pressure medication, they are protected. Take the pill, check the box, move on. What they don't realize is that when you take it may matter just as much as whether you take it at all. Here is the physiology behind that statement. In a typical cardiovascular pattern, blood pressure follows a natural arc through the day, rising through the morning, peaking in the mid-afternoon, then easing downward as evening arrives. The body expects nighttime to be a lower pressure environment. For many people, it is. But a significant number of adults over 60, particularly those already managing hypertension, don't follow that pattern. Their pressure does not dip at night. It holds steady, or worse. It surges during the early morning hours when the body's defenses are at their most reduced. This is called nocturnal hypertension. And most patients have never heard those two words spoken together in a doctor's office. Nocturnal hypertension is not simply daytime hypertension occurring at an inconvenient hour. It is categorically more dangerous. During sleep, the arterial walls are in a relaxed, unguarded state. They are not braced for a pressure surge the way they are during waking activity. When blood pressure spikes at 3 in the morning, it strikes those walls with a force that dramatically increases the likelihood of rupturing vulnerable arterial plaque, triggering clot formation, and initiating the exact sequence of events that ends with someone being rushed into my operating room before sunrise. If your blood pressure medication is taken only in the morning, its protective effect may be substantially diminished or entirely absent by the time your body enters its most dangerous hours. The medication you took at 7 in the morning may have nothing left to give at 3 the next morning. The evidence supporting evening dosing is compelling and well documented in peer-reviewed cardiovascular research. Studies have demonstrated that shifting blood pressure medication to nighttime can significantly reduce the risk of cardiac events during sleep. Not marginally, significantly. This is a 2-minute conversation with your physician. Ask directly, should I be taking this at night instead of the morning? Write it down before your next appointment so you don't forget. In cardiology, timing is never a trivial detail. Sometimes it is the only detail that matters. Picture the bedroom at 2 in the morning, the house is still. Your partner is lying beside you, and then it starts that low, irregular rumbling that builds into something louder, something that fills the room, something that has probably been the subject of more than one domestic negotiation in your household. Most people hear that sound and reach for an elbow. I hear that sound and reach for a chart, because after 20 years as a cardiac surgeon, I no longer treat heavy snoring as a nuisance or a punchline. I treat it as a red flag, a potential signal of one of the most dangerous and most overlooked conditions affecting the cardiovascular health of adults over 60. A condition that is operating silently, systematically, and destructively in an estimated 30% of older adults, the overwhelming majority of whom have never received a diagnosis and have absolutely no idea what is happening to their heart while they sleep. The condition is sleep apnea, and the mechanism by which it damages the heart is worth understanding in precise detail. During an apnea episode, breathing stops completely. Not briefly for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, sometimes longer. This can happen 40, 50, even 60 times within a single hour. Each time it occurs, oxygen levels in the blood fall sharply. The brain detects the deficit and responds the only way it knows how, by triggering an emergency stress cascade. Adrenaline floods the system. Cortisol surges. Heart rate and blood pressure spike abruptly, jolting the cardiovascular system into a crisis state, while the rest of the body remains entirely unconscious. Your heart is being ambushed in the dark, repeatedly, every single night, and you are sleeping through all of it. The cumulative damage this inflicts is severe and well documented. Adults with untreated sleep apnea carry 3 times the normal risk of heart attack. The condition is directly linked to atrial fibrillation, the irregular heart rhythm that dramatically elevates stroke risk. It accelerates arterial stiffening, drives chronic inflammation, and sustains a state of overnight cardiovascular stress that no amount of daytime healthy living can fully counteract. The warning signs extend well beyond snoring. Morning headaches that greet you before you've had a chance to start the day. Exhaustion that persists regardless of how many hours you spend in bed. Frequent nighttime urination. Waking with a dry mouth, or a sensation of gasping. If any of those experiences feel familiar, they deserve a direct conversation with your physician about a sleep study. I want to be unambiguous about this for anyone over 60 with any history of cardiac disease or hypertension. A sleep apnea evaluation is not an optional wellness consideration. It is a fundamental component of protecting your heart. CPAP therapy is not anyone's idea of glamorous. I acknowledge that freely. But the cardiovascular evidence behind it is extraordinary: measurable reductions in blood pressure, significantly lower rates of arrhythmia, and meaningful reduction in overall cardiac risk. One device, every night, potentially everything. This next habit is the one that earns the most pushback in my office, because unlike the others, it isn't rooted in ignorance or carelessness. It is rooted in logic, careful, reasonable, completely understandable logic. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous. A large number of adults over 60 make a deliberate decision to stop drinking fluids in the late afternoon or early evening. The reasoning is sound on its surface. Nobody wants to be navigating a dark hallway at 2 in the morning. And for older adults, nighttime trips to the bathroom carry a genuine fall risk that shouldn't be dismissed. So the fluids get cut off. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, sometimes earlier. A practical solution to a practical problem. What most people making that calculation don't realize is what they are inadvertently doing to their blood. Hydration is not simply about thirst or comfort. It is about viscosity, the physical consistency of the fluid your heart is responsible for moving through every vessel in your body, every minute of every night. When your fluid intake is insufficient, blood thickens. It becomes denser, more resistant to flow, significantly more prone to the kind of sluggish movement that allows clots to form. For a cardiovascular system in its 30s or 40s, mildly thickened blood is a manageable inconvenience. The vessels are elastic, the heart is strong, and the system compensates without difficulty. For a body over 60, that same mild dehydration lands very differently. Arterial walls that have stiffened over decades cannot accommodate reduced blood flow the way younger vessels can. Plaques that have accumulated along those walls create narrow channels where slow-moving, thickened blood becomes genuinely hazardous. And here is the compounding factor that most people never consider. During sleep, your heart rate drops, and circulation slows naturally as part of the overnight recovery process. That is normal and healthy. But when you layer clinical dehydration on top of an already slowed circulatory system, inside arteries that are already narrowed, in a body that has been completely motionless for 7 or 8 hours, you have assembled nearly every condition required for a clot to form. This is not a theoretical risk. It is one of the primary reasons that strokes and cardiac events concentrate so heavily in the early morning hours. The quiet convergence of factors that built up silently while you slept. The solution requires almost nothing from you. A single full glass of water, 8 ounces taken before you get into bed. That modest amount is sufficient to maintain blood viscosity at a safe level through the overnight hours. Place a second glass on your nightstand. If you wake during the night with any sense of thirst, drink it without hesitation. Your body and your heart are making the same request. You do not have to sacrifice cardiovascular protection to get a good night's sleep. You just have to drink a glass of water before you close your eyes. I want to ask you something that no one has probably ever asked you in a medical context. What temperature is your bedroom right now? Not your thermostat setting. Not what you intend it to be. What is the actual temperature of the room where your heart spends 7 or 8 hours every single night, working through its most vulnerable shift of the day? Most of my patients have never considered that question from a cardiac perspective. They've thought about it in terms of personal comfort, blanket weight, whether their spouse runs hot or cold. What almost none of them have considered is that bedroom temperature is not merely a matter of preference. It is a physiological variable with a direct and measurable effect on cardiovascular stress, and outside of a specific range, your heart is working harder than it should be. Every single night, without giving you a single symptom to notice. Let me explain what happens at both extremes. When a bedroom is too warm above approximately 72 degrees Fahrenheit, the body activates its heat dissipation systems and keeps them running continuously through the night. Blood vessels dilate in an effort to release heat through the skin. Heart rate remains elevated rather than settling into its natural overnight rhythm. Perspiration increases fluid loss gradually but consistently, compounding the dehydration risk we discussed in the previous section. And perhaps most consequentially, sleep architecture deteriorates. The deep, slow-wave stages of sleep, the stages where the heart undergoes its most meaningful overnight recovery, become shorter, less frequent, and less restorative. A warm bedroom doesn't just make you uncomfortable. It quietly robs your cardiovascular system of its nightly repair window. The opposite extreme carries its own distinct set of risks. A bedroom that is genuinely cold, below approximately 65 degrees Fahrenheit, triggers the body's thermal conservation response. Blood vessels constrict throughout the body in order to preserve core temperature. Peripheral resistance increases. Blood pressure rises. The heart must generate significantly more force to push blood through tightened, contracted vessels. For an individual over 60 managing coronary artery disease, hypertension, or any degree of arterial stiffening, that sustained overnight pressure elevation is a meaningful and serious cardiovascular burden, not a minor inconvenience. The optimal range, supported by both sleep science and cardiovascular research, sits between 65 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Within that corridor, the body maintains what physiologists call thermoneutral balance, a state in which no significant energy is being diverted to either heating or cooling the body. Blood vessels remain appropriately relaxed. Heart rate settles naturally into its lowest, most protective overnight rhythm. Sleep moves freely into its deepest, most restorative stages. One thermostat adjustment. No prescription required. No lifestyle overhaul. Just a number 65 to 72 degrees that your cardiovascular system has been waiting for you to set. The simplest interventions are often the ones we dismiss most quickly. This is not one to dismiss. I want to step back for a moment and reframe everything we've covered, because I suspect it may be starting to feel like a catalog of threats. 5 separate problems, 5 separate sources of concern, 5 more things to carry to bed with you tonight. That is not how I want you to leave this conversation. When you look at all 5 habits together, not as isolated risks, but as a connected system, what emerges is not a burden. It is a blueprint, a coherent, evidence-based evening routine that addresses every single vulnerability we've discussed, fits naturally into a normal life, and requires no medication, no equipment, and no dramatic reinvention of how you live. I call it the cardiac safe evening protocol. Here is exactly how it works. Between 6 and 7 p.m., your main meal. Lean protein, vegetables, a reasonable portion of complex carbohydrates, if your body requires them. Not a deprivation meal, not a feast. A proper dinner, eaten at a civilized hour, giving your heart a full 3 to 4 hours to complete its digestive work, before you ask it to shift into overnight recovery mode. At 7 p.m., water and medications. 8 ounces of water to begin building your overnight hydration baseline. And if your physician has never specifically discussed the timing of your blood pressure medication with you, write that question down tonight. Evening dosing may offer substantially greater cardiac protection than morning dosing. That conversation is worth having before your next appointment. Between 8 and 9 p.m., your deliberate wind-down window, a slow walk around the block, quiet reading, a calm conversation with someone you love. This is also the hour to distance yourself from screens, particularly smartphones held close to the face, which suppress melatonin production, and keep the nervous system in a state of alertness that directly undermines the cardiovascular recovery your body is trying to initiate. By 9 p.m., prepare your sleep environment. Adjust the thermostat to somewhere between 65 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Place a full glass of water on the nightstand. These 2 actions take less than 2 minutes and address 2 of the 5 risk factors we discussed entirely on their own. By 10 p.m., you are in bed. And if snoring or interrupted breathing has ever been a concern, make a conscious choice to sleep on your side rather than your back. Supine sleeping significantly worsens airway obstruction. A positional adjustment costs nothing and can meaningfully reduce apnea episodes while you pursue a formal clinical evaluation. Dinner by 7. Hydration and medications handled. A quiet, screen-free wind-down. A properly conditioned room. In bed by 10. On your side. The clinical evidence behind this routine is not ambiguous. It works. The only variable that remains is a personal one. Whether you begin tonight is entirely your decision, but tonight is when it matters most. I want to speak to you directly now, not as someone producing content for a screen, as a surgeon who has spent 20 years inside the consequences of what we've been discussing tonight. I have stood at an operating table at 3 in the morning with my hands around a heart that had stopped because a clot formed quietly overnight in an artery that had been narrowing for years while its owner slept, peacefully, completely unaware. I have walked down hospital corridors at dawn to speak with families in waiting rooms. Families dressed in whatever they grabbed when the phone rang. Families who had said goodnight a few hours earlier and had absolutely no reason to believe it might be the last ordinary thing they ever said. I have reviewed the records afterward. I have read the notes, the histories, the contributing factors, and what I have found, case after case, year after year, is that the factors were never mysterious. They were never exotic or unforeseeable. They were a dinner eaten at 9 o'clock at night, a blood pressure medication taken at the wrong hour, or not taken at all, a bedroom 10 degrees too warm, a body that climbed into bed quietly dehydrated because its owner was trying to avoid a bathroom trip, an airway that had been collapsing dozens of times per hour for years while everyone in the household assumed the snoring was simply snoring. Ordinary, unremarkable, entirely preventable. These are not rare risk factors affecting a small and unlucky minority. They are the background conditions of millions of American households, playing out every single evening in bedrooms across this country, accumulating silently night after night until the night they don't. Here is the most important clinical truth 20 years in the operating room has given me. The majority of the hearts I have had to repair did not fail because of fate or genetics or bad luck. They failed because of missing information. Specific, practical, actionable information that nobody had ever taken the time to deliver clearly. You now have that information. What happens next is yours to determine. Let me leave you with 5 clear actions. Not suggestions, actions. 1. Finish your main meal by 6 or 7 in the evening. Your heart needs 3 to 4 hours between your last substantial meal and sleep. Give it that window, every night. 2. Contact your physician before your next appointment and ask one specific question. Should my blood pressure medication be taken in the evening rather than the morning? That conversation may be the most consequential medical discussion you have this entire year. 3. If you snore heavily, wake up exhausted regardless of hours slept, or have ever been told you stop breathing during the night, schedule a sleep apnea evaluation. At 60 and beyond, this is not an elective consideration. It is cardiac care. 4. Drink a full glass of water before you get into bed. Place a second glass on the nightstand. Do not allow your blood to thicken overnight in the name of avoiding a bathroom trip. Your heart is making a different calculation than your convenience is. 5. Set your bedroom temperature between 65 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit tonight. Not eventually. Tonight. That single thermostat adjustment costs you nothing and begins protecting your cardiovascular system immediately. Before you move on, I want to ask you something genuine, and I'd like you to answer in the comments below. Which of these 5 habits did you recognize in yourself tonight? I have sat with enough patience to know that at least 2 or 3 of them landed close to home. You are not unusual in that. You are simply someone who now knows what to do about it. If anything here was useful to you, please pass it along. There is someone in your life, a spouse, a sibling, a close friend who is over 60 and has never once connected what they do before bed to what their heart endures overnight. Send this to them. That small act may matter more than you know. Your heart has been working without interruption, without complaint, every minute of every night for your entire life. It has never asked for much. Give it what it needs to keep going. Good night. Sleep well, and please talk to your own physician before making any changes to your medication schedule. Everything shared here reflects current cardiovascular research and my own clinical experience. It is not a substitute for your personal medical care. That is not a disclaimer. That is one doctor's sincere request.